Right, hello ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Let's carry on. Chapter 7, Refugees. Despite overwhelming tiredness and several stops for nausea, Irene straight made good time on her north drive from where she had left the other pilgrims in North Dakota. She drove straight through the night, arriving at the border just before noon on Saturday. Canadian authorities were taking details from refugees as they crossed into the country and directing them to appropriate holding camps. Tom, Betty, and their grandchildren were deemed to be in greater need of medical attention than Irene and Ramey, so they were put on a bus and taken to Regina, where they could be given better care. Cross-country travel was being restricted throughout Canada. Irene was totally broke, and her pleas for official help in getting to Toronto were turned down. Toronto, according to the authorities, had more than it could handle already. Irene and Ramey were, however, taken to a holding camp on the highway between Regina and Winnipeg. They had to abandon the Lincoln at the border. The camp was one of many being set up on farmland all over southern Canada. Irene and Ramey would have to wait there until the situation eased in Toronto, or until they could get airlifted directly out of Saskatchewan. I hope I said that right. They were both losing hair and suffering from dehydration from so much vomiting, but they were not as sick as some others in the camp. The refugee camp consisted of thousands of 12-foot by 12 tents, housing 8 people apiece. Every 4 tents had one porta potty and a small portable shower between them. Buckets inside the tents were used when the queues were too long at the toilets or when the weather was bad. The farmland where the camp had been set up was a quagmire from recent rains and from so much pedestrian traffic. Refugees were told to stay inside the tents to minimize further contact with fallout. Food, water, and medication for nausea, diarrhea, and infections were brought around twice a day by untrained volunteers. Only the worst cases were referred to the understaffed medical center on the perimeter of the camp. 2 doctors supervised a small team of nurses there. Life at the camp was rough, but it was rumored that conditions there were better than they were at many other camps. Pan-Continental Airlines was notified by the authorities about Irene and Ramey's condition and location, and Pancom passed the word on to Rayford. The family had little choice but to wait on official clearance for a reunion. For the time being, Irene and Ramey took comfort in the fact that they had safe food and water and a tent with bunks in which to sleep, rest, and hope. There was no way for Rayford to contact them directly, and only the most urgent outgoing calls were allowed at the camp. Any other time, Ramey might have been whining about the conditions. They were worse than any jail in North America. But for the first 2 weeks, he was too sick to do so, much more than groan. He was too sick to do much more than groan, as he tossed and turned in his bunk. Only when his strength began to return did he start to complain. Even then, it was nothing compared to his old self. Irene sat pretty heavily on his complaints, reminding him again and again how lucky they were to be alive. But Ramey was genuinely trying to break his old habits. It was like his spirit had simply been waiting for Irene to get the courage to exercise authority over it. Kids need discipline and authority. Stop trying to be their best friend. Of course, world events was such that everyone had been sobered about much that they had previously taken for granted. All in all, Raimi had been forced to do a lot of growing up in a very short period of time, and he was quickly warming to his new self-image as a disciplined and responsible adult. The 8 residents in each 10 passed their time lounging in bunks, talking and doing various chores and calisthenics if they were strong enough. Much of the talk centered around each person's interpretation of what happened and where it was all to lead for them and their loved ones. Virtually everyone was grieving over the loss of immediate family and friends, though most could only guess as to whether people outside their immediate household had survived the attack. Normal communication links within the US had totally broken down shortly after the bombings. Although there was no newspapers at the camp, some volunteers had access to news at home, and they passed on whatever they knew when they arrived at the camp. From there, news would spread quickly by word of mouth. The residents learned that the United Nations had taken over coordinating relief operations. In just a few weeks, much of the surviving population of America was to be dispersed around the globe from many holding camps in Canada and Mexico, and from airlifts within the United States. Airlifts, that is, from those few places where aircraft could still come and go. Weather patterns had been favourable, blowing most of the fallout over the Atlantic. An Atlantic cold front 3 days after the attack pushed the air southward and kept most of the fallout away from Canada. Even so, radiation levels in southern Canada were still far above normal. Canadians had been cautioned to stay inside as much as possible. The rest of the world, apart from islands in the Caribbean and some of parts of Mexico, were assured that the radiation threat to them was minimal. Russia's attitude to the war was to act as though it had never happened. As soon as her bombers had completed their mission, blowing up military installations and other centers of transportation, power and communication, they had returned to their bases. From that point on, Russia had offered much aid to the survivors as anyone else. That's because it's not just Russia, it's a coordinated event, it's the New World Order. America has to go because you have guns and you're not going to give up your guns. So they can't afford to have this long war. The US and England had both been officially expelled from the UN just days after the attack. America was dropped because it ceased to exist, but almost no explanation was given for dumping England. Despite protests from the British, there was hardly any objection from other member nations. UN Secretary General Zhu Dangchao, with strong backing from Russia and China, was able to push things through with ease that world leaders always have in the face of disasters. The expulsion had not been accompanied by any sanctions against Britain, and the Brits themselves were so preoccupied with assisting Americans that they did not have the necessary heart to take on the UN in the face of inexplicable indifference from the rest of the world. Loss of American trade was a threat to the economy of many smaller nations, but the UN started to work immediately on programs to reclaim land owned by American interests and to recultivate it so that it could carry products which would better meet the needs of the local populations. The same thing was being done with American industrial interests. Secretary General Deng Chao promised to actually increase wealth for the Third World, and the World Bank was surprisingly cooperative with his proposals. This is what I mean, like, these rich people, they're looking to build their paradise in the third world. I'm telling you. This is why they're pushing everyone out into Europe, because they're looking to make the old switcheroo and build their new comforts and their new worlds, and they're going to own so much land. And everyone else is going to have to live in the old desolate cities and whatever. And to live in their paradise, you're going to have to become one of these, or the things you're going to have to do to be in the in crowd. Just think Hunger Games, man. Come on. Where was I? Recultivate it so that it could carry products which would be better met the needs of the local populations. The same thing was being done with American industrial interests. Secretary General Deng Chao promised to actually increase wealth for the third world, and the World Bank was surprisingly cooperative with his proposals. The economic summit was being planned to consider various proposals for stabilizing the world economy. Talk of a single currency was a key issue on the agenda. One UN project was not getting as much coverage as the economic and political changes, was a plan for a world religious summit. The masses of the world longed for reassurance that the US disaster was not going to be repeated, and religious leaders had been shocked into overlooking differences that had previously divided them. They too wanted to play their part in promoting worldwide cooperation with one another, as well as cooperation with the quickly evolving world government. In times of crisis, people turn to religion for comfort and direction. So it was important for the government and the churches, synagogues, mosques and temples to provide a unified and unifying image of hope and peace. We saw that last couple of years, 2020, 2021. They know exactly where to go. They know what bases to cover. Straight to the churches. They know exactly when this all goes down, they know exactly who's going to be a problem, who they have to watch out for, keep an eye on. Preppers, nationalists, and believers. Trust me, they're building lists. You're on dossiers, people. Just like they know, oh man, they just know. This is what's happening with our lives. We're just been funneled into a direction. And everything's going to seem so beautiful, so amazing when the son of perdition rises. He's going to come with all the answers. And everyone's going to be like, yay! Because they would have had such a bad couple of years. No word had been received at all from President Fitzhugh, who, with his family and aides, had been trapped under the White House when it was bombed. Hopes were fading that they had survived the blast, even though a series of tunnels existed under the building, and it was believed that he had been rushed there several minutes before the bombs hit. Under normal circumstances, there would have been a system for appointing a replacement for the president, but the vice president and several other potential successors were dead or missing, along with a sizable portion of the senators and congressmen who would have to oversee such a decision. Most of those who were alive were little more than refugees themselves. Truly, America had ceased to exist as an independent nation. The US's unwavering support for Israel had been that country's mainstay for many years. The tiny Jewish state, surrounded as it was by Arab nations, was understandably nervous about the shift of power. But Deng Chao surprised the world and gained respect for his sense of fair play by putting peace talks between Israel and the Arab states high on his priorities. It was rumoured that Jewish influences in the World Bank were what really won Deng Chao over. He was getting many billions of dollars in support from the World Bank for his third world plans. In exchange, the UN was taking a decidedly pro-Israel position in the peace talks. I'm telling you, the blue star is right in the middle of everything. I'm telling you. But sadly, for the millions of Americans still struggling to escape the death and destruction that had ravished that country, developments in world politics were incidental to their daily quest for survival. Tens of thousands were continuing to die each day from injuries received in the initial blasts, some of them dying without any medical aid at all. Many had been left where they fell, to suffer for days before finally succumbing. A few had been carried away, only to die on the road, in refugee camps or in hospitals. Burials were rare, cremations were fast, but in most cases, bodies were left to rot, and disease was left to spread, as survivors had fled the scene. For people like Chloe, still waiting for help to reach her, the threat of catching cholera or typhoid was now the biggest worry. End of chapter. Zion Ben Jonah writes, 2 symbols are used for America in Bible prophecy: a prostitute named Babylon and the eagle's wings on the back of a lion. The lion being the symbol for England. See notes at the end of chapter 2. In Daniel 7:4, the eagle's wings are plucked and the lion, i.e. England, ceases to be a beast or world empire as a result. In Revelations 17:16-18 and all of Revelation 18, we read of the fall of Babylon and how it affects the kings, merchants and shipping companies around the world. So exactly how can Babylon be the Catholic Church? When it talks about merchants and shipping companies. Remember, however, that the term Babylon not only refers to America, it is a symbol for all of the empires of man. Disagree. It's a symbol for all the Roman Empire, aka most of Europe and the countries which Europe spread to, like America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. And so the title will eventually pass on to the new center of the world of economics under the New World Order. The rise of a single world religion may or may not be assisted by the United Nations. Moves toward ecumenicalism have been underway for some time now. Ecumenicalism, that means like representing all the churches combined, like Christianity like united. Ecumenicalism have been underway for some time now, but disasters always have a way of bringing the masses back to thoughts of religion and of bringing religious leaders together with one another. This is what us believers we have to be very careful of and worry about. Coexistence. coexistence. That's going to be the New World Order religion. They're going to mash some kind of hodgepodge, mix in a bag all the religions. And we can't fall for that. America's obsession with Israel is usually explained to the masses, thanks to the churches, on the basis that they are God's chosen people, despite the fact that they rejected God's Son, their Messiah. However, interest in Israel at government levels has always had more to do with their control of world banking. Easy family, yes, I'll address that. So, America's obsession with Israel usually explained to the masses, thanks to the churches, on the basis that they are God's chosen people. But they changed the people. You see, that's America. That's the world's biggest secret. And that's their obsession. That's why they're obsessed with it. That's why they're obsessed with backing Israel. Because they're a major part. They're all in it together, basically. As I keep saying. And Israel, true Israel, are God's chosen people. And that's where you get the mess up here. They make it sound like Israel and Jesus is just two different people. But yes, the Messiah was handed over to the Romans by his own people. You know? There's just so many times I hear, oh, well, the Jews killed Jesus. The Jews killed Jesus. And it's just like, oh, man. Read the Bible. Read the Bible. It's like an avid Game of Thrones fan. They would be so upset you thinking that Game of Thrones is only about the Lannisters, Daenerys, and Jon Snow. Because it goes way back. It goes way back. There's so much more to the story than that. Which is why we're getting House of the Dragon. Because it explains the families. It explains some Old Testament. But in Game of Thrones terms, if you really want to go back, you have to go back to Exodus. So in Game of Thrones terms, Exodus will be like, let's just say the fall of Valyria, where the Targaryens actually go to Westeros, and there they take over the lands and they subdue all the kings and all the wars. This is why I tell you, a lot of these Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, they're all Bible based. So it's not just about New Testament and Jesus. You have to go back for the whole story to get a full understanding. A full understanding. And then you know, where was the change? Where was the change? People say, oh, America is now the new Israel. Well, show me that. Where did it change? Where did it change? Because we could show you just so many chapters, so many scriptures where it talks about God giving back everything to the people for the promises he made in Deuteronomy. Because we are who we are, no matter how much we like it, we try to run from it, we are who we are. We're under the covenant. And that's why God is going to fulfill his promise for his sake. So that the world knows he's a fair and just God and he keeps his promises and his word is true. This is why I thank the Most High for showing me the rabbit hole first. Because I had to see the lies to recognize the truth. Say amen.